The dim glow of the briefing room cast long shadows, accentuating the stark contrast of light and darkness. Captain Alex Drake stood at the front, his presence commanding and intense. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the assembled operatives, handpicked from the best covert units the Foundation had to offer. Each of them a phantom in the night, each of them deadly in their own right. Tonight they were to become something more, MTF Sigma 9, the Nightshade Phantoms. Drake's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Welcome to your new reality. As of this moment, you are no longer individuals. You are shadows, silent and unseen, moving with ghostly precision. Our mandate is clear: we contain the uncontainable, we neutralize the nightmares. Tonight we embark on our initial operation. The mission briefing flashed onto the screen behind him, displaying grainy footage of a remote facility deep in the Siberian wilderness. The images showed blood-soaked corridors and bodies contorted in unnatural positions. The target SCP-173, a malevolent entity of bone-crushing speed and blood-curdling terror. We have limited intel, Drake continued, his tone cold and unyielding. But what we do know is that this thing moves faster than the human eye can track. It kills without hesitation, without mercy. Our objective is to infiltrate the facility, assess the situation, and contain SCP-173. Failure is not an option. We are the Foundation's last line of defense. The operatives listened in grim silence, their faces hardening with resolve. They had all seen horrors before, but this was different. This was existential dread, paralyzing horror that gnawed at the edges of their sanity. Drake could see it in their eyes, but he knew that fear could be harnessed, turned into a weapon. Remember, he said, we are shrouded in darkness, silent as shadows. Our tactics are unforgiving violence and relentless force. We strike without warning, and we leave no trace. Move out. The team dispersed, each member a part of the seamless whole. Drake watched them go, his mind already racing ahead, planning, calculating. He knew the risks, they all did. But they were the Nightshade Phantoms, and they would face the nightmare head-on. As they boarded the transport, the oppressive darkness of the Siberian night enveloped them. The hum of the engines was the only sound, a low, haunting reminder of the task ahead. Drake checked his gear, his movements methodical and precise. He had led many missions, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher, the enemy more brutal. The transport touched down silently, a ghostly apparition in the night. The team disembarked, their forms blending seamlessly with the shadows. They moved with a coordinated grace, each step a testament to their training and resolve. Drake led the way, his senses hyper-aware, every nerve on edge. The facility loomed ahead, a dark monolith against the starless sky. As they approached, the air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. It was as if the very atmosphere recoiled from the malevolent presence within. They breached the perimeter, slipping through the defenses like wraiths. Inside, the facility was a blood-soaked battlefield, carnage-strewn corridors echoing with the whispers of the dead. Drake signaled his team to halt, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "Stay sharp," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is where the nightmare begins." As they ventured deeper, the sense of dread intensified. Each step brought them closer to SCP-173, each shadow a potential threat. They moved with ghostly precision, their breaths shallow, their hearts pounding. The air was thick with the scent of blood and fear, a visceral reminder of what awaited them. And then they saw it. SCP-173 stood in the center of the room, its grotesque form bathed in the eerie glow of emergency lights. It was a sculpture of malevolent intent, a twisted parody of life. Drake felt a chill run down his spine, a gut-wrenching panic that threatened to overwhelm him. "Eyes on the target," he ordered, his voice a cold, hard edge. "Remember our training. We contain the uncontainable." The team spread out, their movements synchronized, their resolve unbroken. They were the Nightshade Phantoms, and they would face this horror together. Drake tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes never leaving SCP-173. The battle was about to begin. The Nightshade Phantoms advanced through the facility with an eerie stillness, their footfalls silent against the blood-streaked floors. Captain Alex Drake led the way, his senses tuned to every flicker of movement, every whisper of sound. The oppressive darkness pressed in on all sides, broken only by the cold, sterile light of their flashlights. Every shadow seemed to pulse with hidden threats, the silence pregnant with the promise of violence. They came face to face with their first obstacle, a corridor smeared with gore, the walls painted in visceral reds and browns. The bodies of the previous containment team were strewn about, their forms twisted in grotesque parodies of life. Drake's gut tightened with a mixture of rage and horror. This was SCP-173's handiwork, a display of bone-crushing speed and blood-curdling terror. Eyes sharp, phantoms, Drake whispered, his voice a blade cutting through the haunting silence. This thing moves faster than we can track. Stay alert. The team nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They moved forward, each step a delicate dance of coordination and caution. The air was thick with existential dread, the kind that gnaws at the back of your mind and saps your will. Yet they pressed on, driven by duty and a shared resolve to face this nightmare. Drake's flashlight beam caught a glimpse of movement, a flicker at the edge of his vision. His heart pounded as he swung the light around, illuminating SCP-173. It stood there, motionless yet malevolent, its form grotesquely rigid. The sight of it sent a wave of paralyzing horror through him, but he forced himself to stay focused. "Target in sight," he said, his voice cold and steady. "Remember, it can't move if you're looking at it. Maintain visual contact at all times." The team spread out, their eyes locked on SCP-173. It was a game of endurance, a savage onslaught of nerves. They knew that even a blink could mean their end. Drake's mind raced, calculating their next move. They needed to secure the room, establish a containment perimeter, and find a way to neutralize the threat. "Martinez, set up the barriers," Drake ordered. "Everyone else, keep your eyes on that thing." Martinez moved quickly, his hands deftly assembling the portable containment barriers. The rest of the team stood their ground, their eyes unblinking, their muscles tense. SCP-173 loomed in the center of the room, a predator held at bay by their collective gaze. Drake felt the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, the enemy more brutal. Every second was a struggle against the gut-wrenching panic that threatened to overtake him. But he knew they couldn't afford to falter. Not now. Suddenly, the emergency lights flickered, casting the room into a strobe-lit nightmare. In the disorienting flashes, SCP-173 seemed to jerk closer, its form a blur of savage intent. Drake's heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of primal fear. He tightened his grip on his weapon, his mind racing for a solution. "Stay focused," he shouted over the chaos. "Do not blink." The team held their ground, their eyes burning with the effort of maintaining their gaze. The flickering lights created a disorienting dance of shadows and light, making it even harder to keep track of SCP-173. The sense of looming despair clawed at their minds, but they fought it back with sheer force of will. Finally, the lights stabilized, and SCP-173 was frozen once more, its form just inches from where it had been. The close call left the team breathless, their bodies racked with tension. Drake knew they couldn't keep this up indefinitely. They needed a plan, and fast. "Martinez, status on those barriers," Drake asked, his voice tight with urgency. "Almost there, sir," Martinez replied, his hands working with frantic precision. "Just a few more seconds." Drake nodded, his eyes never leaving SCP-173. He could feel the existential dread gnawing at his resolve, but he pushed it aside. They were the Nightshade Phantoms, and they would face this nightmare together. The room seemed to hold its breath as Martinez finished setting up the barriers. With a final decisive click, the containment field activated, encasing SCP-173 in a shimmering barrier of energy. The sense of immediate danger lessened, but the gut-wrenching panic lingered at the edges of their minds. Drake allowed himself a brief moment of relief. They had survived their first encounter with SCP-173, but he knew this was only the beginning. The real battle lay ahead, and they would need every ounce of their strength and resolve to face it. "Good work, team," he said, his voice steady. "We've secured the room, but our mission isn't over. We need to find a way to neutralize this thing for good. Let's move out." As they regrouped and prepared for the next phase of their operation, the oppressive darkness and haunting silence seemed to press in on them once more. But they were the Nightshade Phantoms, and they would continue to fight, no matter the cost. The mission spiraled into chaos almost as soon as they left the containment room. Captain Alex Drake led his team down a narrow corridor, the walls slick with blood and ichor, the air thick with the metallic tang of violence. The grisly demise of their predecessors served as a grim reminder of the savage onslaught they faced. The Nightshade Phantoms moved with a desperate scramble, their breaths quick and shallow, their movements frantic. "Eyes on me," Drake barked, his voice cutting through the chaotic frenzy. "We stick to the plan." But the plan was falling apart. SCP-173 had slipped their gaze for a fraction of a second, and that was all it needed. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into an abyss of oppressive darkness. Drake's flashlight cut through the void, revealing the blood-soaked battlefield that had once been a sterile facility. The walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with the weight of death. "Contact," Martinez's voice rang out, sharp and edged with panic. Drake swung his light around just in time to see SCP-173, its grotesque form lunging towards one of the team. With bone-crushing speed, it snapped the man's neck, leaving him crumpled on the floor, brutally eviscerated. "Damn it," Drake roared, his voice a blend of rage and desperation. "Keep it in sight. Don't let it move." But the team was unraveling. The once coordinated grace of their movements dissolved into a chaotic frenzy. In the confusion, another operative fell, savagely torn apart by the sculpture's relentless force. Blood splattered across the walls, adding to the carnage-strewn corridors, a gruesome testament to SCP-173's lethal efficiency. Drake fought to maintain control, to turn the chaotic frenzy into something resembling order. Regroup. Fall back to the secondary position. The remaining operatives scrambled to follow his command, their movements a desperate attempt to escape the looming threat. They retreated down the corridor, eyes wide with existential dread. Drake's mind raced, calculating their next move, but the dread of annihilation gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. As they reached a temporary safe zone, the echoes of their frantic maneuvers faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. The walls, splattered with gore, seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of their own. Drake took a moment to assess the situation. They had lost 2 more team members, their bodies left behind in the blood-soaked battlefield. The gut-wrenching panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he shoved it aside, focusing on the task at hand. "We need a new plan," he said, his voice harsh and unyielding. "Martinez, set up a defensive perimeter. We can't afford any more losses." Martinez nodded, his face pale but determined. He moved quickly, his hands shaking as he deployed the portable barriers. The rest of the team spread out, their eyes scanning the shadows, every nerve on edge. The chaotic frenzy of the past few minutes had left them drained, their bodies racked with exhaustion, but they pressed on. Drake tightened his grip on his weapon, his knuckles white with the effort. He knew they were running out of time. SCP-173 was relentless, a predator that wouldn't stop until they were all dead. The looming despair threatened to crush his spirit, but he couldn't afford to give in. Not now. "Stay sharp," he ordered, his voice a cold, hard edge. "We're not out of this yet." The team nodded, their resolve hardening in the face of the encroaching doom. They were the Nightshade Phantoms, and they would not go down without a fight. As they prepared for the next phase of their mission, the oppressive darkness and haunting silence seemed to close in around them. But they stood their ground, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. In the distance, a low, rumbling noise echoed through the facility, a sinister promise of more violence to come. Drake felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced himself to stay focused. They had a mission to complete, and they would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. "Move out," he commanded, his voice a steel blade in the darkness. "We finish this." The Nightshade Phantoms moved forward, their steps a dance of determination and dread. The shadows seemed to pulse with unseen threats, the air thick with the promise of violence, but they pressed on, driven by a relentless force of will. They were the Foundation's last line of defense, and they would face the nightmare head-on. Captain Alex Drake's breaths came hard and fast, each inhalation burning with the cold, stale air of the facility. The surviving members of the Nightshade Phantoms huddled in a small control room, their faces pale, eyes wide with exhaustion. Martinez was setting up the last of the barriers, his hands moving with meticulous strategy despite the chaos they had just escaped. Drake knew they needed more than just barriers, they needed a plan, a ruthless determination to fight back against the relentless predator that was SCP-173. "We need to regroup and hit it where it hurts," Drake said, his voice a cold calculation of their dire situation. "We've seen it kill, we know its speed. Now we need to find its vulnerabilities and exploit them." The room was lit by the dim glow of emergency lights, casting eerie shadows that danced on the blood-splattered walls. The oppressive darkness beyond the barriers was a constant reminder of the nightmare lurking just out of sight. The haunting silence was occasionally broken by the distant echoes of something moving, something that promised more pain and death. Drake turned to Martinez. "Status on those injuries?" Martinez glanced up, his eyes dark with exhaustion. "They're bad, sir. Several of us have agonizing wounds that need immediate attention. We can't keep pushing like this without rest." Drake nodded, his mind racing with the cold calculation of their chances. "We'll rest soon, but first we need a plan to neutralize SCP-173. We can't keep running. We have to face it." He spread a map of the facility on a blood-streaked table. "Here's the layout. We're here, in the control room. SCP-173 was last seen here, in the central corridor. If we can lure it into one of these containment areas, we might be able to trap it long enough to neutralize it." The team leaned in, their eyes following his finger as he traced the route. The dread of annihilation was clear in their faces, but so was a spark of hope, a cold, unyielding resolve. They were the Nightshade Phantoms, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. "Reyes," Drake said, turning to one of the operatives, "I need you to set up motion detectors along this corridor. If it moves, we need to know immediately. Martinez, I want you to rig these barriers with whatever explosives we have left. If it gets too close, we blow it back to hell." Reyes nodded, his movements precise despite the pain-racked body he inhabited. Martinez's hands were steady, each action a testament to their training and resolve. They moved with a purpose, driven by the looming despair, but refusing to succumb to it. Drake tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes scanning the shadows. The oppressive darkness seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, each second a brutal test of their endurance. The sense of encroaching doom was a heavy weight on his shoulders, but he wouldn't let it crush him. "Not now." "Team," he said, his voice a steel blade cutting through the silence. "We're the Nightshade Phantoms. We've faced nightmares before, and we've survived. This is no different. We move with ruthless determination. We strike with cold calculation. And we do not fail. The team nodded, their eyes hardening with resolve. They checked their weapons, their gear, each movement methodical and precise. The chaotic frenzy of their earlier encounter was gone, replaced by a grim determination to see this through. The oppressive silence stretched on, the air thick with the promise of violence. Drake's mind raced, calculating their odds, but he knew they had no other choice. They had to face SCP-173, and they had to win. "Move out," he commanded, his voice unwavering. "We finish this." The Nightshade Phantoms moved as one, their steps a cold calculation of survival. The shadows seemed to pulse with unseen threats, but they pressed on, driven by a relentless force of will. They were the Foundation's last line of defense, and they would face the nightmare head-on, no matter the cost. As they approached the central corridor, the haunting silence was broken by the distant echoes of something moving, something that promised more pain and death. But they didn't falter. They were the Nightshade Phantoms, and they would not go down without a fight. They would face the nightmare, and they would survive. Drake tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. The sense of looming despair was a constant presence, but he shoved it aside. They had a plan, and they had each other. They would face SCP-173, and they would win. They had to. Captain Alex Drake could feel the weight of every breath, the cold air slicing through his lungs as he led the Nightshade Phantoms into the heart of the facility. The ultimate showdown with SCP-173 was imminent. The oppressive darkness pressed in on them, the haunting silence broken only by the distant hum of emergency lights. They moved with ruthless determination, every step calculated, every breath measured. They reached the central containment area, a vast room lit by flickering, pale lights. The walls were marked with the signs of previous battles, a grim reminder of the apocalyptic struggle that awaited them. The team spread out, each member taking up a position, their eyes scanning the room with relentless vigilance. They were ready for the clash of titans, prepared to face the hellish confrontation that loomed ahead. Drake's voice was a cold blade in the silence. "Martinez, are the charges set?" Martinez nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Charges are set, sir. If it comes through here, we'll blow it to hell." Drake felt a grim satisfaction. They had prepared for this moment, orchestrated a retaliatory strike with cold calculation. The sense of heart-wrenching loss from their fallen comrades weighed heavily on them, but it fueled their resolve. They had a mission to complete, and they would see it through. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows. Drake's pulse quickened. "Stay sharp, Phantoms. It's coming." A low, rumbling sound echoed through the room, a sinister promise of the violence to come. The shadows seemed to pulse with malevolent life, the air thick with the weight of impending doom. And then it appeared. SCP-173, the sculpture, stood in the doorway, its grotesque form bathed in the flickering light. It was a twisted parody of life, a predator that had brought so much pain and death. "Eyes on the target," Drake shouted, his voice cutting through the gut-wrenching panic that threatened to overtake them. "Do not blink." The team's eyes locked onto SCP-173, their breaths shallow, their bodies tense. The clash of titans began. The sculpture lunged forward with bone-crushing speed, but the Nightshade Phantoms moved as one, their actions a seamless dance of precision and brutality. The charges detonated, filling the room with a thunderous roar. SCP-173 was thrown back, its form momentarily obscured by the explosion. "Now," Drake commanded, "hit it with everything you've got." The team unleashed a torrent of firepower, their weapons blazing with relentless force. The room echoed with the sound of gunfire, a hellish symphony of survival and destruction. SCP-173 staggered, but it did not fall. It moved with a savage grace, each lunge a deadly promise of violence. The Phantoms countered with coordinated precision, their resolve unbroken despite the soul-crushing sacrifice they knew this battle would demand. Drake felt a surge of adrenaline, his senses heightened, his mind focused. He moved with ruthless determination, his eyes never leaving the target. SCP-173 lunged again, its bone-crushing speed a blur, but Drake was ready. He sidestepped, his movements a fluid dance of survival. He fired, the shot hitting the sculpture's torso, but it did not slow. It kept coming, a relentless force of nature. "Fall back," Drake shouted, his voice a steel blade of command. "Regroup and hit it again." The team moved with precision, their actions a cold calculation of survival. They regrouped, their breaths coming in ragged gasps, but their resolve unbroken. They would face this nightmare, and they would survive. They had to. The battle raged on, a hellish confrontation of man versus monster. The room was filled with the echoes of violence, the air thick with the scent of blood and gunpowder. The shadows pulsed with unseen threats, the sense of looming despair a constant presence. But the Nightshade Phantoms fought on, driven by a relentless force of will. Finally, with a heart-wrenching roar, SCP-173 staggered, its form shuddering. Drake seized the moment. Now, finish it. The team unleashed their final barrage, a merciless onslaught of firepower. SCP-173 fell, its grotesque form collapsing to the floor. The room fell silent, the oppressive darkness lifting, the sense of dread dissipating. The echoes of victory rang hollow in the blood-soaked chamber, but it was a victory nonetheless. Drake lowered his weapon, his body racked with exhaustion. He looked at his team, the shadows of the fallen a heavy weight on his shoulders. They had lost so much, but they had won. They had faced the nightmare, and they had survived. "Good work, team," Drake said, his voice a mixture of relief and sorrow. "We did it." The Nightshade Phantoms stood together, their breaths coming in ragged gasps, their bodies battered but unbroken. They had faced the ultimate nightmare and emerged victorious. The legacy of the Nightshade Phantoms was secure, a testament to their relentless resolve and cold determination. As they made their way out of the facility, the shadows of the fallen followed them, a silent reminder of the cost of survival. But they had faced the nightmare, and they had won. They were the Nightshade Phantoms, and they would continue to fight, no matter the cost. Thank you for watching. I apologize for the shorter than usual content in this video. Real life has gotten in the way. A few of you asked for MTF content, and mixing in some HFY elements seemed logical. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and comment your opinions on the content length and type. Let me know if you'd prefer this type of content on this channel or a separate one. Your feedback is invaluable, and I appreciate your support. See you next time.